What if Hollywood wasn't founded by dreamers, but by fugitives? A century ago, it was citrus groves and dust, while back east, Edison's trust crushed anyone who dared make films without permission. The escape west, the barn that became a studio, and one line, "You ain't heard nothing yet," that detonated the silent era. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on who built Hollywood, which shows defined America, and how studios turn ideas into empires. If you love uncovering the machinery behind your favorite stories, tap like and subscribe to Uncharted America, new deep dives every week.
Today, we see Hollywood as a monolithic giant, a shimmering symbol of cinematic dreams. But a century ago, it was little more than dusty land and citrus groves. On the other side of the country, in New Jersey, another world existed, a world controlled by one man's iron grip on the burgeoning film industry. This contrast between a seemingly idyllic California landscape and a tightly controlled East Coast business environment set the stage for one of the greatest migrations in entertainment history: the Great Escape. How Hollywood became Hollywood. It's a common misconception that a visionary founder simply pointed to a map and declared, "Here we shall build the movie capital of the world." The truth is far more pragmatic and rebellious. Hollywood's birth was less an act of creation and more an act of escape, fleeing the Wizard of Menlo Park. In the early 1900s, the film industry was dominated by Thomas Edison and his motion picture patents company, MPPC, often called the Edison Trust. This powerful conglomerate held patents on nearly everything needed to make a movie, from cameras to film stock. If you wanted to make a film, you had to pay the trust. They enforced their monopoly aggressively, sending agents, some would say thugs, to smash the equipment of independent filmmakers who dared to operate without their license. Imagine a young, ambitious filmmaker, your mind buzzing with stories, only to be told you can't create unless you bow to a corporate giant. This was the reality for many. The solution? Run. Filmmakers began looking for a place far from Edison's reach in New Jersey. Southern California was the perfect hideout. It was geographically distant, making it difficult for patent enforcers to pursue them. More importantly, its proximity to the Mexican border offered a quick escape route if agents did show up. But it wasn't just about evasion. California offered a filmmaker's paradise: year-round sunshine and incredibly diverse landscapes. Within a short drive, you could find deserts, mountains, oceans, and forests. Why build expensive sets when nature provided them for free? This combination of legal refuge and natural advantage was irresistible.
The trickle of filmmakers soon became a flood. Among them was director Cecil B. DeMille. In 1913, he and his partners, Jesse Lasky and Samuel Goldwyn, set out to make a film. Their original destination was Flagstaff, Arizona, but upon arrival, DeMille found the landscape uninspiring. He boarded a train and continued west until he reached the end of the line, a small village called Hollywood. It was here, in a rented barn, that DeMille shot one of the first full-length feature films made in Hollywood, The Squaw Nan, released in 1914. The film was a massive success, proving that complex, feature-length stories could be told on screen and, crucially, that Hollywood was a viable place to make them. While not the absolute first, its success was a catalyst. The first dedicated studio, the Nestor Motion Picture Company, had already set up shop in an old tavern in 1911, but DeMille's hit put Hollywood on the map for good. The barn where he filmed still exists today as the Hollywood Heritage Museum. A new era, when the movies learned to talk. As Hollywood grew, so did the ambitions of its new moguls. The silent era was in full swing, a universal language of gesture and title cards captivating audiences worldwide. But four brothers, immigrants from Poland, were about to gamble everything on an idea that many industry veterans considered a foolish gimmick: sound. The Warner Brothers' audacious bet. Harry, Albert, Sam, and Jack Warner founded their studio, Warner Brothers, in 1923. They were scrappy underdogs compared to giants like MGM or Paramount. To compete, they needed to innovate. Sam Warner became obsessed with a new technology called Vitaphone, a system that synchronized sound recorded on a separate phonograph disc with the film projector. The industry was skeptical. Studio heads believed talkies were a passing fad. Why ruin a perfect art form? Audiences, they argued, didn't want to hear actors speak. It would destroy the mystique. But Sam saw the future. He convinced his reluctant, business-minded older brother, Harry Warner, to invest. It was a massive financial risk that could bankrupt their young studio. Their first major project using this technology was The Jazz Singer, released in 1927. The film was mostly silent, with a synchronized musical score and a few scenes where its star, Al Jolson, ad-libbed dialogue and sang. When Jolson looked out at the audience and famously declared, wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet," the world changed. Audiences were electrified. They hadn't just seen a movie, they had heard it. The sound era had begun. The success was explosive, but it was shadowed by tragedy. Sam Warner, the visionary who had championed sound, suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and died on October 5, 1927, just one day before the film's triumphant New York premiere. He never got to witness the revolution he had started, the one that would save his family's company and forever alter the course of cinema. The rise of sound wasn't just a technical change, it was a cultural earthquake. It ended the careers of many silent stars whose voices didn't match their on-screen personas and launched a new generation of talent. Studios had to re-equip their theaters, and actors had to learn a new craft. The silent, universal art form was suddenly speaking English, a shift that had profound global implications. From a dusty refuge for patent-dodging rebels to the epicenter of a sonic revolution, Hollywood's early years were defined by risk, innovation, and a relentless drive to tell stories in new ways. But as the studios grew more powerful, solidifying into the system we know today, did they retain that rebellious spirit? Or did they become the very giants they once sought to escape?
The answer, ironically, is that they became precisely the kind of giants they had once fled. The spirit, the rebellion that birthed Hollywood, was soon replaced by a new, far more sophisticated system of control. Having escaped Edison's monopoly on technology, the new studio heads, men like Louis B. Mayer at MGM, Jack Warner at Warner Bros., and Harry Cohn at Columbia, built their own monopolies on something far more valuable: talent. This was the dawn of the studio system, an industrial age approach to art that would dominate American culture for 3 decades and create the very definition of a movie star. The system's foundation was a concept known as vertical integration. The major studios didn't just produce films, they also owned the distribution networks that transported the film prints across the country, and most critically, they owned the theaters where the films were shown. This gave them absolute control. An independent theater owner who wanted to show MGM's latest blockbuster might be forced into a practice called block booking, meaning they also had to agree to rent a slate of the studio's lesser quality B movies. It was a closed loop of commerce that locked out competition and ensured a constant stream of revenue, regardless of a film's quality. The rebels had become the new trust. But the most fascinating and often brutal aspect of this system was its control over people. Actors, writers, and directors were signed to draconian, long-term contracts, typically for 7 years. These contracts were masterpieces of legal subjugation. A studio could, at its discretion, put a contract on hold if an actor refused a role, meaning the actor couldn't work for anyone else, but the time they were suspended was added to the end of their contract. It was a gilded cage. In return for fame and a steady paycheck, you surrendered your autonomy. This gave rise to the star system, a human assembly line for creating idols. Young, aspiring actors were scouted and molded into whatever image the studio desired. Their names were changed. The fiery Margarita Carmen Cancino was transformed into the elegant Rita Hayworth. The girl next door Frances Gumm became the iconic Judy Garland. Their life stories were fabricated by studio publicity departments to be more appealing to the public. They were told how to dress, how to walk, and who to date for the cameras. Studio dentists perfected their smiles, and studio surgeons altered their features. Every aspect of their public and private lives was meticulously curated. Morality clauses in their contracts meant that any hint of scandal, a divorce, an out-of-wedlock child, a DUI, could result in immediate termination and financial ruin. The stars weren't just employees, they were assets, carefully managed investments whose value depended on maintaining a flawless, studio-approved illusion.
This factory-like approach extended to the filmmaking process itself. Each major studio developed a distinct brand identity, much like car manufacturers. MGM, under the opulent leadership of Louis B. Mayer, was the home of glossy, high-budget prestige pictures and musicals. It boasted more stars than there are in heaven, and produced polished, family-friendly entertainment designed to radiate glamour. Warner Brothers, by contrast, was the studio of the working class. Their films were gritty, fast-paced, and are ripped from the headlines. Gangster films, social problem dramas, and backstage musicals. They were shot on smaller budgets with a raw, energetic style. Universal became famous for its classic horror cycle, creating enduring monsters like Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman. Paramount was known for its sophisticated comedies and European-influenced visual style. A moviegoer in the 1930s or 40s could often guess the studio behind a film just by its look and feel. This efficiency was maintained by a rigid departmental structure. Writers worked in bullpen-like offices, churning out scripts. Art directors, costume designers, and cinematographers were all long-term employees who developed a signature house style. An actor would finish a film on a Friday and be expected on a different set with a new script and a new character on Monday morning. It was a relentless machine, producing hundreds of films a year. However, this machine operated under a powerful external constraint that shaped every story it told. The Motion Picture Production Code, commonly known as the Hays Code. Fearing federal government censorship after a series of Hollywood scandals in the 1920s, the studios decided to police themselves.
The code was a set of moral guidelines that dictated what could and could not be shown on screen. It was enforced with an iron fist by Joseph Breen, a man who saw movies as a powerful tool for moral instruction. The code's rules were extensive and absolute. Crime could never be shown to pay. Adultery and illicit sex could not be portrayed as attractive or justified. The clergy could not be depicted as comical or evil characters. The American flag had to be treated with respect. There was to be no profanity, no nudity, and no explicit violence. Even a married couple in a film was typically shown sleeping in separate twin beds. The code's influence was profound. It forced writers to become masters of innuendo and suggestion. A simple fade to black after a passionate kiss could imply more than any explicit scene ever could. While it sanitized Hollywood's output, it also arguably made filmmakers more creative, forcing them to find clever ways to tell adult stories within a restrictive framework. For decades, this tightly controlled world seemed unshakable. The studios were empires, their heads were kings, and their stars were the royalty of a new American mythology. But two seismic shocks in the late 1940s and early 1950s would bring the entire structure crashing down.
The first was a legal blow. In 1948, the Supreme Court case United States versus Paramount Pictures, Inc. delivered a verdict that shattered the foundation of the studio system. The court ruled that the studio's ownership of movie theaters constituted an illegal monopoly. They were ordered to divest, to sell off their exhibition chains. This single decision broke the back of vertical integration. Studios could no longer guarantee a theatrical run for their own films, and they lost their most reliable source of income. The economic model that had sustained the golden age was dead. The second shock came not from a courtroom, but from a small, flickering box that was beginning to appear in American living rooms: the television. At first, the movie moguls dismissed it with contempt. Chuck Warner famously quipped, "Who the hell would want to hear actors talk in their living room?" They saw it as a fad, not a threat. They were catastrophically wrong. Television offered free, convenient entertainment, and audiences, particularly families in the booming post-war suburbs, stayed home in droves. Movie attendance plummeted. The studios panicked. They tried to lure audiences back with technological gimmicks, dazzling widescreen formats like CinemaScope, the brief craze of 3D movies and stereophonic sound. They poured money into massive, colorful epics like The Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur, offering spectacles that television couldn't possibly replicate. While some of these strategies worked temporarily, the fundamental power dynamic had shifted forever. The era of the captive audience was over. The collapse of the studio system and the rise of television created a power vacuum. With the long-term contract system dissolving, actors were no longer tethered to a single studio. They became free agents, and in their place rose a new figure of immense power: the agent. Visionaries like Lew Wasserman of MCA pioneered the package deal. Instead of a studio developing a project internally, an agent would assemble the key elements: a star, a director, and a script, and sell it to the highest bidding studio. Power was no longer concentrated in the hands of a few studio heads. It was now in the hands of the talent and their representatives. This new reality is perfectly illustrated by the story of a show mentioned earlier, Friends. When the sitcom began in 1994, its 6 principal actors were relatively unknown, but as the show became a global phenomenon, their collective power grew exponentially. For the final 2 seasons, the cast famously negotiated together, demanding and receiving $1 million per episode for each of them.
This was an act of solidarity and financial leverage that would have been unthinkable under the old studio system, where actors were deliberately kept apart and pitted against each other to prevent them from organizing. The Friends negotiation was a symbol of the new Hollywood, where star power could dictate terms to the very networks and studios that broadcast their work. Simultaneously, the medium that was once Hollywood's greatest threat began to evolve into a new creative frontier. For decades, television was seen as the less prestigious younger sibling to film, but with the rise of cable networks like HBO and later streaming services like Netflix, that perception changed. These platforms were not bound by the content restrictions of broadcast television or the need to appeal to a four-quadrant movie audience. They could invest in long-form, character-driven storytelling that was often more complex and daring than what was being produced for the big screen. This led to what many call the second golden age of television, with shows like The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, and of course, Game of Thrones. A series like Game of Thrones was a production on a cinematic scale, with a budget and global reach that rivaled any Hollywood blockbuster. It demonstrated that television could be the premier destination for epic, sprawling narratives, attracting A-list talent and commanding a central place in the cultural conversation. The streaming services became the new studios, engaging in a content arms race and giving creators unprecedented freedom, in some ways echoing the wild, experimental spirit of Hollywood's earliest days. The rebels, it seems, had found a new frontier, not in the Californian desert, but in the vast, on-demand landscape of the digital age. The cycle of innovation, consolidation, and disruption that began with a flight from Thomas Edison continues to this day, forever reshaping the stories Americans love and the industry that creates them.
This new landscape, however, prompted a reaction that the early tech evangelists had not fully anticipated. The old empires struck back. The very studios that had once dismissed television and later streaming realized they were sitting on arsenals of their own. Disney, Warner Brothers, NBC Universal, these legacy giants possessed something Netflix had to build from scratch, a century's worth of beloved characters and stories. They launched their own streaming services, Disney+, HBO Max, Peacock, and began pulling their most valuable content from rival platforms, effectively building walled gardens around their intellectual property. The battle was no longer just about creating the next hit show. It was a war of archives. Disney's strategy was particularly potent, leveraging its acquisitions of Marvel, Lucasfilm, Star Wars, and Pixar to create a service that was less a library and more a digital theme park of modern mythology. The cycle had turned once more. The disruptive outsiders had become the new establishment, forcing the old establishment to become disruptors themselves, pouring billions of dollars into technology and content to compete in a world they had been slow to embrace. This intense competition for subscribers has fundamentally changed the calculus of what gets made, elevating the concept of intellectual property, IP, from a legal term to the central organizing principle of modern Hollywood. In an environment where countless shows and movies are available at the click of a button, familiarity is the ultimate currency. An original, star-driven drama is a significant risk. A new series set in the Star Wars universe is a near-guaranteed subscription driver. This has given rise to the modern super producer, a figure who functions like a studio head of a bygone era, but whose domain is not a physical studio lot, but a sprawling narrative universe. Kevin Feige at Marvel Studios is the quintessential example. He oversees the Marvel Cinematic Universe, MCU, with a meticulous, long-term vision, ensuring that each film and series functions both as a standalone story and as a puzzle piece in a much larger, interconnected saga. This model provides audiences with a continuous narrative to invest in, turning moviegoing and show-watching into a hobby akin to following a sports league.
The success of the MCU has become the blueprint every other studio is desperately trying to replicate, leading to an explosion of reboots, prequels, and expanded universes as studios mine their own back catalog for any character or story that might anchor a new franchise, and with it, a loyal subscriber base. The nature of stardom has also been irrevocably altered in this new ecosystem. The mystique cultivated by the old studio system, where stars were distant, untouchable gods, has been replaced by a demand for authenticity and constant access. Today's biggest stars are not just actors, they are multi-platform media moguls. Consider Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. His power stems not just from his box office draw, but from his direct, unfiltered line of communication with hundreds of millions of followers on social media. He uses these platforms to promote his films, launch his own brands, and share his personal life, creating a powerful sense of connection with his audience. He is, in effect, his own studio publicity department, one that is far more effective than any press release. This gives him immense leverage. When a studio casts him, they are not just hiring an actor, they are partnering with a global marketing machine. This shift has created a new class of star entrepreneur who builds their own brand independently of any single studio, using their audience as their primary source of power. A level of autonomy that would have been unimaginable to even the biggest names of Hollywood's golden age. Ultimately, the power has shifted not only to the creators and stars, but also to the audience itself, albeit in a way that is filtered through a new, invisible gatekeeper: the algorithm. Every choice a viewer makes on a streaming platform, what they watch, how long they watch it, what they browse, what they abandon after 10 minutes, is a data point. This massive trove of information is analyzed to determine what projects get greenlit. It is the new form of market research, a digital focus group of millions that is always running. This data-driven approach has led to a boom in niche content tailored to specific tastes, but it has also raised concerns that it encourages formulaic storytelling, favoring projects that fit a proven pattern of engagement over those that are truly original and daring. The invisible hand of the algorithm has, in many ways, replaced the moral certitude of the Hays Code, enforcing not a set of social values, but a code of what is statistically most likely to retain a subscriber. Hollywood's machine, from its rebellious birth to its corporate present, continues to be a reflection of its time, a complex, ever-evolving engine fueled by technology, commerce, and the timeless human desire for a good story.